up. Kasparov just under 10 minutes. Anand just over 10 minutes left. This is an incredible position. Bishop c8 attacking the rook on h3.
Oh, and he has the...
Oh,
rook
yes!
takes b6.
The king is in trouble.
Rook takes b6 is his idea. And queen a7.
Fantastic.
What a diabolical trick.
That is a lovely move. So the rook on h3 attacked. When it moves, for instance, to h4, then rook takes bishop, knight takes rook, and queen a7. And we've been hammering on about how Kasparov's king is potentially exposed, and we're seeing a trick straight away. Kasparov had to play that.
But it doesn't work.
But hang on. He's trying to cover the diagonal.
And knight comes back to...
Knight comes back to d5. That's the idea. Queen comes to b7. And the bishop's trapped. No, it can go to a5. What a miserable square. Then queen a7.
Or bishop e6.
Very nice. Bishop's come to d8. Oh, brilliant.
Wow, fantastic.
Brilliant. Rook takes bishop, knight e7.
Fantastic play.
And knight e7. Coming anyway. It looks like Kasparov has done it.
Oh, amazing stuff.
Two threats, bishop e7 or knight e7 check. Well, hang on, mate isn't threatened yet, but still, on h7, this looks so powerful. Amazing.
Kasparov found a brilliant idea there.
And knight e7, the threat, then rook takes knight, pawn takes, threatening queen takes knight, and also e8 queen. Is it possible to defend? I don't see it. There's, well, let me see, queen d7.
Knight e7 check.
Then rook takes knight.
Pawn takes rook. Knight e6. Rook takes f7.
Oh, knight e6 has been played. But wait a second. How is rook h3?
Knight takes g5.
Ah, knight g5. That's the idea. Rook h3 threatening mate, but then knight takes g5. If queen takes knight, bishop takes rook.
So
the knight has gone in. Had to be taken, and now queen d7.
Rook takes f7 now. Rook takes f7.
And if king takes rook, queen h7.
And rook f3 check, and it's all over.
Well, fantastic. Is
Or
that
is
right?
it?
Knight f4, knight takes, queen g4 check. Oh, I don't know.
Oh, hang on.
No, but this, I cannot believe that Anand.
It doesn't work.
I do not believe that Anand can survive this position with the pawn on e7. I think Kasparov just has to take his time. He's played rook h3.
It's the end. That's.
And now,
queen f8 mate is going to
right,
decide.
if knight takes g5, queen f8 mate, Anand has resigned. Brilliant victory from Kasparov. Just when he looked like he lost the thread, he finds a fantastic move. Bishop d8. Anand had not anticipated it. Kasparov wins brilliantly.
As a postscript to what Nigel was saying, for all you theory buffs out there, this variation with g4 has really taken off this year. At the recent Super GM tournament in Tilburg, Holland, there were no less than 3 games played featuring this exact variation, and they all ended in quick victories for white. What I love about this variation is that it's so brutal, it's so crude. White's strategy is absolutely clear. You're just throwing your rooks around with your queen and attempting to bludgeon black's king on the king's side. Anand put up a brave fight in game 2 but just couldn't recover, so Kasparov went through to meet his old rival Vladimir Kramnik in the final. Both the 25-minute games in the final ended in rather uneventful draws. It seemed as though the players were just showing each other too much respect. So that left us with 2 5-minute blitz games.
Now, what's Kasparov doing here?
He's using up a lot of time.
He is. Now is the time he has to find a plan, because he's developed his pieces. Knight to d4, occupying that nice square in the centre of the board. And Kramnik playing bishop to e5. Kasparov has exchanged on c6, so now we have the so-called hanging pawns on c6 and d5.
e5.
Yeah, a5, the typical move here for Kramnik. And he's played c5. The other way. Okay, so he's liquidated this weak pawn on c5. And his pieces look okay. Kasparov would really like that knight on d4, not d3. So I think this position is okay for black. It seems a reasonable position for Kramnik. It's a roughly balanced position, and Kasparov has used more time. That's the difference. He has roughly 3 minutes left, Kramnik 4 minutes. Kramnik, I've seen him play blitz before in these events, and I don't think I've seen anyone who plays as quickly. He is pretty impressive when it comes to blitz. Queen d4.
Bishop e4. That's a good move.
But with the queen on d4, I find it very hard to believe that Kasparov could possibly be worse here. And they're repeating moves. Repeating moves. Are we going to get another draw? It looks like it. No. Kasparov disappointed. Perhaps one of them will vary. Yep, Kasparov is the first to do that. But he's got less time. That was a brave decision.
d4? How is d4?
d4. d4, nice move. Getting rid of the isolated pawn, and the rooks would look very good for black. But even that must be equal. Must be an equal position. He's played d4. Kasparov exchanging queens. Now the problem is, after pawn takes pawn, rook takes pawn, the knight is attacked, and the knight defends the bishop on e2. It's not easy.
Rook fd1.
Rook fd1 has been played, knight g5 takes. What's happening now? Kramnik can push to d3. It's a risky decision. Oh no, then push to d2. Kasparov blockades the pawn.
How is g4?
Oh, he's played it, and Kasparov's bishop locked out of the game on h5. He plays f3 to bring it back, but now rook takes pawn. Kramnik is a pawn up, and Kasparov is fighting for a draw. He also has less time. Kramnik in the driving seat here with this wonderful passed pawn on d3. At the moment, Kasparov blockading. Kramnik looking at the pawn on a3 with the rooks. His rook's very active. That's a nice move. Rook b5. Needs to activate that rook. Somehow he's got to try and lift the blockade of the rook on d2. Now he's advancing. He wants to advance the pawn to a4 and play rook b3.
Perhaps.
He's played rook d4, attacking the h-pawn. I didn't like that move h4. Rook e5. This is gritty defense from Kasparov. And Kramnik now, using up a lot of time, trying to make progress. He can't seem to do it. Kasparov, his defences are holding so far. He has slightly less time, but the time's now evening up.
Now rook c2 is coming.
Rook c2. Well,
Rook c2, rook b2.
yeah, but that looks dangerous.
It does indeed.
And exchanging one pair of rooks, I think, is going to help Kramnik.
Rook c5.
Now, he's just taking his time here. What's he done? What's he played? He's exchanged a pair of rooks and played f6. And the rook has moved over to c5. He wants to play to c2. There's no c3. Attacking the a-pawn. Now, if Kasparov defends... He's going active. He wants to check with his rook. The rook comes down. So he has some active play. But is it going to be enough? Kramnik now 2 pawns up. How are the clock times? Kramnik with, well, perhaps a hint of a time advantage, but this is very strange. This is very strange indeed. Kasparov can get one of the pawns back. What is going on? Sorry, the monitor just going crazy here. Kramnik now 3 pawns up, but Kasparov's pieces are very active. 3 pawns up. This must be winning for Kramnik. Who has more time? Kramnik has more time. Now he's controlling the position. This must be winning for black. There he goes. White's king in terrible trouble. Kasparov has resigned.
This is perhaps the key moment in the game. Kramnik is threatening to play rook to e4, and when the queen moves back, then he breaks through in the centre with pawn to d4. And really, he should have no problems here at all. So Kasparov played bishop to f3, but then came bishop e4, bishop e2, and the players repeated moves for a couple of moves. And really, I think Kasparov, well, with a lot of hindsight, he should have just acquiesced to the draw. But instead, he played the queen to b4. Now, the problem was he was already a bit down on time here, and that move was just asking a bit too much from the position. Of course, he wanted the exchange, and then he might be able to go for the pawn on a6. However, Kramnik had other ideas, and he played the pawn to d4, breaking through in the centre, and this proved, as we saw, to be terribly powerful. The queens were exchanged. Rook takes queen. Rook d1, and then this really powerful move, g5. That's probably the move that Kasparov missed, because now it's very awkward indeed for the white knight. It came to h5, then after knight takes h5, bishop h5, pawn to d3. Kasparov was in trouble, because then after rook d2, well, he really had to block that pawn. There came g4, just trapping the bishop for a moment. In order to get the bishop out, Kasparov had to give up a pawn. He played the pawn to f3, but after pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn, Kramnik was a safe pawn up. In the second blitz game, Kasparov fought bravely, but to no avail. All Kramnik needed was a draw, and he remained rock solid. Kramnik was the maestro in Moscow. Could he repeat his success in Geneva? In the second round, he faced a difficult opponent in Jonathan Spielman. Many of the classical Russian players simply cannot get a handle on Spielman's idiosyncratic style. And in the first game, Kramnik was simply bamboozled in the middle game. Kramnik didn't play his normal pawn to d4, instead he played knight to f3. I'm sure that was designed especially for Spielman. He just wanted to await events and see what Spielman was going to wheel out. Well, indeed, Spielman did go his own way. He played his pawn to b6. Not so gauche, but a little bit unusual. Kramnik played very solidly, pawn to g3, and then came bishop to b7, bishop g2, and now again Spielman went his own way. Instead of playing perhaps knight f6 or e6 or maybe c5, all standard moves, he chose to fianchetto his second bishop. Now this isn't always advisable, but Spielman, he knows what he's doing. Kramnik played his pawn into the middle, pawn to d4. He thought the time had come to seize the centre. Bishop g7, and white castled. Kramnik, I think, showing a lot of respect for Spielman. He's playing very solidly indeed. Knight came to f6. So this is very unusual. Spielman is playing a kind of King's Indian setup on the king side, but with a fianchetto here on the queen side. It's a very unusual combination. Only Spielman can get away with it. He seems to know what he's doing. Pawn came to c4. Pawn to e6, preventing a white pawn coming to d5. Knight c3. And now Spielman occupied that central square on e4. Knight to e4. knight takes e4, bishop takes e4. The point of doing this is to prevent white from actually advancing in the centre with pawn to e4 himself. So Spielman is trying to occupy the centre with his pieces rather than pawns, as Kramnik is doing. Bishop g5. It's a slightly awkward move to meet because f6 doesn't look that attractive, blocking out the bishop on g7. So Spielman played the queen to c8. But that's okay because the queen can come to the long diagonal on b7. Queen d2. And now, this is an important move. If Spielman castles here, then bishop h6 comes, exchanging off the bishops, and black's king is a little bit sensitive. So instead Spielman flicked in h6 first, and the bishop went back to e3. And of course that also means it's a bit risky, because black of course can't castle for the moment, because that h-pawn would be hanging. So Spielman playing a dangerous game here. Spielman continued his strategy of trying to dominate the centre with his pieces by playing the queen to b7, supporting the bishop on e4, so just increasing the pressure on the long diagonal as well. So a nice move. Rook fd1. Now Kramnik has a threat. He wants to play his pawn to d5, just breaking the communication between the queen and the bishop. Now this is dangerous, because remember, Spielman's king is still trapped in the centre, because that h-pawn would be hanging if black castles. So to prevent that d5 move, Spielman played d5 himself. Rook came to c1.